So today we can go over. We do story. We've got a few questions to field. Things we didn't get to last time. And then any new industry stuff or geopolitical stuff might be interesting.
Okay, so the couple of things that I had were, let's see, VMware purchased Carbon Black this week, $2.1 billion. Billion.
Wow, I didn't see that. How did I not see that?
Yeah. And at the same time, it was actually just earlier last week, kind of at the end of the week. So VMware making that purchase, like that seems super smart to me. Like
Yeah.
they, EMC, Dell, I mean, they just somebody over there like makes really good purchases. But then I read another thing at the end of last week talking about it was basically Michael Dell saying like, "Hey, Kubernetes is coming to VMsphere soon," and I
Oh.
was like, Wait, you're not already there?" Like,
Yeah.
uh-oh, like who missed this? Who missed that story? Like, wow. But at the same time, the organization behind the Kubernetes thing is actually like going out of business.
What?
Yeah,
They're
you didn't
like
see
the
this?
most successful thing.
Right.
How are they not
Like,
making money? I mean, every
um,
dev team is using that some way, shape, or
right,
form.
right. Like it's the thing everywhere, right? Um, yeah, they were Kubernetes news. Here it is. Okay, so here it is. So this was also from last week, but so it's not Kubernetes per se because that's like just the process, right? But Docker is
Oh, yeah.
apparently like in freaking huge financial trouble. Um,
Hmm.
yeah. Microsoft, Docker, substantial. So Microsoft tried to buy them for 4 billion. Um,
Docker.
yeah.
And they walked away from that?
Apparently.
How do you walk away from 4 billion? Like, is the
I don't.
multiplier not right? But then wait, you have.
Well, so it says that they raised 273 million since its inception in 2010, but still 4 billion on that, right? Is like
It's a huge multiplier, you know?
right, like that should make somebody happy. Um, so they've brought in 273 million, which is just a huge number since 2010, right?
It is a huge number.
Um, and then Microsoft reportedly made him an offer in like 2017, I think is what they were talking about, for 4 billion. Which to me seems like, you know, obviously we're on the outside, right? So who knows?
Yeah, but billion with a B. I
Yeah.
mean, like, the multiplier there on revenue versus overhead.
Seems
And I
pretty good,
mean,
right?
like,
Like you've got
I,
273 million in VC money,
yeah, like that's
and
the GDP of what country? You know
yeah,
what I mean?
I don't
Like,
know. So anyway, those were just some of the things that I'd scraped up and it was mostly like weird stuff like that, like Carbon Black being purchased.
I mean,
I
the
don't,
carbon
I don't,
black thing makes total sense with the end node market, in the way that they're pricing out quotes in the enterprise. I mean, that's a pretty big deal. I mean, VMware is just a monster
oh yeah, I
gobbling
think it's
stuff up. They don't seem to be losing the capabilities once they buy stuff, which is smart.
yeah, no, I think it's a brilliant move on VMware's part. Add a really, you know, a high-end endpoint security, enterprise endpoint security tool like that into their arsenal. I mean, I don't see how that doesn't make sense, right? That's just got to
Mm-hmm.
be a win. Um, 2.1 billion seems kind of huge, um, but I'm not sure what their sales figures look like or anything like that.
True. But I saw FireEye had acquired another company, Verodin, recently.
Hmm.
I didn't really know much about them, so I suck. But it seems like, this last quarter is who's going to be positioning their acquisitions for next year.
Yeah. Well, did you see where pretty much everybody had passed on FireEye as an acquisition target? All the big players.
They need to. It's
and they're now shopping themselves to private equity firms.
Really?
Yeah. That was the news. The big news last week was that pretty much every major player in the market had taken a pass on them, and that so they were looking to BlackRock or one of those places, right? Somebody with huge pockets and who knows what they exactly do.
Well, they got off on the right foot to begin with Sequoia and those guys.
Yeah.
But man, the end game of that, or the end story of that, is somewhat predictable, knowing some of the players. But it's interesting that other people that aren't really technical and in the weeds are coming to the same conclusions.
Right. Well, I think I sent you a piece last week that I thought was super interesting about the earnings per. It was actually a financial analyst who'd run down the earnings per for the big companies like that.
Yeah, like the earnings based on how much each employee is actually producing.
Right.
Man, if we got an eval based on that, we would just be like multiplier times 20 or something,
Right. So it was this analyst over at Seeking Alpha. Website.
Alpha, yeah.
Seeking Alpha, very cool website. Lots of interesting, analysis, and they kind of explain their analysis out, all financial stuff. But what I thought was the most interesting piece in there was they had a bit on. They'd actually, I can't get back to the article, where they'd rated all of the big enterprise security companies based on dollars earned per employee.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's really helpful for the boutique market, the smaller guys like us and you. Like, you can actually quantify, this is how strong the team is, not just based on the P&L. And it's always irritating to me to have that discussion, and you're like, well, if you throw more bodies at this is gonna be 10 times better, just because look at what we're performing at now at this velocity and this size, and it's quick and fast and awesome. But this other place over here who's huge and has millions and millions of dollars, it costs them so much per client.
Right. And they were using Palo Alto as basically the high watermark for that, saying that that the average earnings per employee at Palo Alto was somewhere around the 650,000 per employee sort of situation, which strangely enough kind of mirrors what I'm seeing with my clients.
Yeah. The Palo Alto thing on average, depending on how many people are in some of those states, that it's going to be higher per employee to keep them.
Oh, sure.
Even at $300,000 a year, you're still doubling, the revenue per employee.
But when you're as big a shop as, say, Mandiant, and your average earnings per employer $220K, that's actually below what a little company like myself does for services. Right?
Yeah, no, exactly. I'm with you.
Obviously on something that large, that's not a sustainable model. Now a big chunk of that is obviously Palo Alto, huge amounts of hardware going out the door, stuff like that. Like I said, I have a lot of clients switching their old Cisco gear and Sonic Wall and Checkpoint stuff out for Palo Alto gear and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Generally seems to be pretty popular amongst the network, security crowd.
I think it is too. We were talking last week about that compromise where the solution that they had was just, well, let's just put in a Palo Alto. It's like, you're like, well, what about a bunch of other stuff? It's not about
Yeah,
putting in new shiny
that's
toys, maybe not a flat network, maybe ingress egress filtering, maybe two-factor authentication.
yeah. No, that
Um,
particular client is going to put in brand new shiny Palo Alto firewalls, which are awesome. I'd take them.
yeah,
They got all the licensing for them, and then they're not going to do anything with them, right? They're gonna
yeah,
do the minimalistic filtering, no real checking or testing, that they've always been doing. So while they're going to have what arguably might be some of the best hardware on the planet, they're not going to make use of it, right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
it doesn't address their basic problems, which is giant, flat, uncontrolled network on the inside, stuff like that. Is interesting. I spoke at the actually I keynoted. Ooh, I keynoted.
Dang, dude. Hashtag
I know,
awesome.
right? Like craziness. At the DMV Cybersecurity Symposium last Friday, and one of the other speakers right in front of me was Assistant Director of Threat Intel for Palo Alto. Her name was Jen, and it's going to escape me now. But I was asking her questions about the the integration, of their threat intel products, their IDS or IPS, where they're starting to merge everything onto those devices, right?
Yeah.
Which is cool, and from a management standpoint of those devices, I'm 100% with that. And she was talking about, she's actually showing me like, oh, look, we have these, unified management consoles. So you can see all your devices and you can manage, like Heartbeat and know that they're up to the right versions and patch levels. And you've got the same rule sets across, and I was like, yeah, that's wicked awesome. And that's obviously why you guys are killing it. But I started asking her about, my concern is really strong perimeter security is awesome, right? Like, fantastic, way to go. Um, you know, but what about the inside of the network, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
No, nobody loves it. Nobody's watching that traffic. It's if it goes in and outbound, we're filtering it to death and matching it up against things, but there's just not a lot of watching that internal traffic.
Well, I mean, even watching that internal traffic, within that internal network, not leaving the network, there's not a lot of signatures looking for things that move lateral, just because there's such a high false positive rate in that development. Right. Like there's not a huge data set to test for those rules. I mean, I know when we were helping out the emerging threats folks before the Proofpoint acquisition, we would take, we had terabytes of packet captures that we would run every new rule against before we threw it out the door. And the ones that were really the worst were always, MSRPC or PDF stuff on the inside if you didn't do, correct, flows and anchoring the right way. I mean, you're just going to get hit with a million false positives, and then no one wants to like trust that. And so, the inside part of it, that's always hard from a signature perspective, and also from the insider perspective. I mean,
right?
How many compromises or even investigations in the last 15 years have always been insiders? It's like 95%, 90. Other
right,
than the ransomware, right?
Yeah, I mean, all the numbers point to, like 66% of the time, like 2/3 of the time, and like Verizon reports, the FBI reports, DHS, like they always point to the same thing. The semantic report, like 60% of the time, it's gonna be inside stuff, just data walking out the door,
Right, right.
or just somebody fouling up on like an epic level, right, and then hiding it, things like this, and.
Well, you even hear some of the rumors out there right now with, people targeting places like SpaceX and Tesla by, the Chinese just basically just sitting in the parking lot, hitting people up and being like, hey, you want to make some extra money? And they're like, excuse me? And, how do they, thwart that, and how do they monitor for that? Like, hey, don't talk to anybody in the parking lot, or, other than doing perimeter security even past your campus,
Yep. I heard that from a mutual friend of ours in the electric scooter industry, that industry is so explosive, as far as growth. but really a very limited engineering community, right?
Right.
There's only so many developers that have ever worked on anything like that, both on the hardware engineering, the software engineering side, and that the amount of crazy back and forth poaching people and sending people over to work for somebody for 2 months to scarf their best ideas and come back and things like this was just you know this just crazy stories. You're like that actually happens. It's like, yeah, it happens in that industry all the time because it's just new explosive emerging market. There's so much money in it, right?
Yeah, well, I mean those little electric scooters are hitting a broad age range on end users. I mean, I know my kids have them.
Yeah,
tons of kids have them. Old people have them.
well, yeah, I mean, I'm talking like the rental ones that you see in cities, right?
Oh, okay.
The limes, the birds, I think there's orange or something. I can't keep up with all the colors, but that sort of thing. Um, but again, that's an industry that's popped up in the last 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
3 years. I mean, like it can't be more than that. And some of these things are in 100 cities worldwide and stuff like that. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But how many designers can there be out there for consumer grade electric rental scooters, right? They can't be a big pool of people that have ever worked on that.
All 17 of them.
Exactly, all 17 of those guys. So I mean, it's perfect industry for that insider problem, right?
Yeah.
You just go and throw a bucket of money on some engineer and come on over.
Well,
having said that, we should not be talking bad about the scooter industry. I'm sure they're doing all the right things.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Sorry, didn't mean to.
Well, kind of talking a little bit about your stuff on the DMV stuff. Addressing the DMV stuff. Some of the threats that I've seen over the years, specifically to DMV stuff, was how different states are handling confidential informants within the state. And so a lot of them will end up taking, embedding a status in the actual photo ID or in your driver's license, and then when it gets swiped or pinged by law enforcement, if you're a confidential CI, like it lets that officer know, like, hey, pass or no pass, let those guys go. Well, what ended up happening was in a few different places was the cartels ended up figuring out, like, hey, we could start compromising those databases and looking for who might be a CI that's buying from some of our downstream guys and boost our profits. So what ended up happening was a few dudes ended up getting shot in the face when they'd go and buy their stuff from a distributor, because he'd be like, hey, give me your ID, we're gonna swipe it. And then from that, like, oh, you're a CI, boom, you're done, So I kind of like some of that risk matrix in some of those areas is really interesting because it's got overlap in the physical world and the cyber world and the physical security and the security of drivers and, the tertiary effects on, election security. And like, there's just so much stuff just tied up in that one small thing that those guys might be thinking, oh, well, it's just network security or it's just IDS. Like, it's the impact is so much greater across the board, and that, so that's I share all that because the theme that we are kind of pursuing a little bit under the covers is it's not all about cyber anymore. It's not all about trophy hacking. It's about all these other secondary and third order effects and compromises that maybe some people might not know about or think about, or hey, maybe there's a DMV out there that's working with their Bureau of Investigation in intrastate, and that's how they're handling confidential informants.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, whenever you have a situation where you got a combination of organized crime, actually getting into serious data elements and things like that, I mean, that starts to become really dangerous, right? I mean, there's the worldwide drug cartel, that's trillions of dollars, right?
Right.
that's gonna buy access to, data sets and things like that aren't, may not be as well controlled as they really ought to be.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, and also a lot of the states are looking at it from just the fact of like, well, I've got 2 or 3 FTEs, that should be enough.
Hold on, I'm getting some weird audio in my. Huh. All right, sorry.
I was saying sometimes a state, a state's DMV, it might be thinking, oh well, we're going to go super heavy on physical security and cops and all that, state troopers, but they're not necessarily pushing in more cybersecurity and more focus on the cybersecurity process and all of that. So,
well, I think we both know that the level of IT and automation in law enforcement industry, especially at the state and local level, can be pretty minimal.
Right.
There's not a lot of, there's just real limited budgets there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And things like that, where it just doesn't allow for maybe the top level of security that you might get, was say a bureau database or something like that. It's going to be more highly protected.
Right.
Just tough space. All right. So one of the other things I had this week too, and it falls directly into Alabama. As long as we're talking about crossovers from digital into the real world, ransomware actually taking hospitals down to the point of they can't provide patient services.
Yeah.
Happened last week. I don't want to say necessarily just in your area, but it's reported out of the Tuscaloosa area that a couple of different hospitals were just completely down, which is crazy. But I guess that's a real impact of something which is.
Yeah, I mean that, and
not super sophisticated, right?
Yeah.
We're talking a little bit of spreading and a little encryption, and and all of a sudden people can't get health care.
Well, worse than that, what if it's tied to your breathing machine?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like straight up.
Yeah.
Boom. You've got 3 or 4 minutes there.
And what I'd seen from some of the hospitals is they were reporting that, with the exception of emergency services.
Yeah, I saw that.
They basically weren't taking on any new patients and things like this until they had it sorted out. But you're right. If you have a loved one or you're a patient in one of those hospitals at that time, all those systems being tied together. I mean, I assume they do exactly like the stock market or anybody else that's
Mm-hmm.
The industry's been around forever. When they're hit with a cyber attack, which is doctors and nurses go right back to the old school way of doing it, right?
Yeah. Well, I wonder if a CISO is going to get fired for that, or if maybe they're going to, maybe the issue wasn't necessarily all technical. It was because maybe they were not given the authority to do their job. I mean, you see that all the time where it's like, especially in healthcare, where it's like the doctors are running the show. And they're saying, oh, I want this tech, I want this, I don't want to be impeded, I don't want any complications, and then security goes out the door just because everybody wants to make sure those guys are happy because they're bringing in the bucks.
Right.
Meanwhile, what happened to ingress egress filtering? What happened to that 2-factor authentication? What happened to segmentation? It just walked out the door because they want to make sure everything's got connectivity everywhere and it's as easy as possible, but it's also as easy as possible for that lateral movement and just ransomware the crap out of stuff. And
as you know from having worked in that space, there's also those extra layers there, like FDA approved equipment, multi-million-dollar MRI machines and things like this that you don't exactly put your security endpoint on the controller for that equipment.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can't really put security on those things all the time, but you can put security around it. I mean, I remember when we were allowed to take 6 months and reverse an EMR EHR system. And like the amount of vulnerabilities there across every possible vulnerability class was just amazing. I mean, you had buffer overflows, you had heap overflows, you had SQL injection, you had decryption of passwords in memory, you had data at rest vulnerabilities, you had SOAP vulnerabilities, you had, I mean, like any way data was accessed, there was always a problem. And luckily we were able to like introduce security around all that vulnerability and really kind of map out the unknown unknowns. But not many people are doing that, nor are they trying to put security around all those vulnerable points. I mean, I think that was probably the most progressive CISO we've seen.
Well, and there's so much. What do you want to call it? There, the industry's sort of collapsing, right? There's a lot of there's some big moneyed healthcare organizations out there buying up lots of smaller ones, adding them on, becoming gigantic multi-state or even nationwide operations and things like this. Those are significantly difficult
oh yeah,
to manage and monitor.
Yeah, the inherent debt that you're purchasing, like, oh my gosh, it could sink your ship. I mean, how many, I mean, you had the same dynamic going on before HIPAA and Sarbanes-Oxley, early 2000s. There was a lot of acquisitions, consolidations in the healthcare market. Things were expanding and collapsing, and now we're having the same thing. And at the time I worked at Health South, the first company that had ever been charged with Sarbanes-Oxley on cooking, I think, $4 billion in strange.
Good times. It was a small $4 billion.
It was a small B, small B. But I remember, they were just buying up so many different healthcare companies, and we were doing assessments and trying to, collapse in some security on everything. And I mean, it was just like nuts how vulnerable things were all the time. And it was just, and there was just no regard to security. Some of those big, X-ray machines out there, you would just, it's running IRIX or something. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
yeah.
But it'd been running forever, so nobody can touch it, and
well, and there's real concerns there, right? Like these are FDA accredited and approved machines. You can't really, alter them in any way.
Right, you can't alter them, but like just putting security around each one of those areas, that in itself, I mean, you're putting in network segmentation, you're putting in new configurations that aren't scalable across every organization, you're putting in, the firewall for that. It's just a nightmare from a scalability and cost perspective to the business. And then, the business doesn't want to hear like, oh, you got to do it this way. They don't want to hear no either. So it's, still back into that, authority versus influence, and then acceptable risk. And I guess one of the things that was plaguing us at the time then was, the acceptable risk bug. Oh, everything's acceptable risk. Like there's never anything that wasn't acceptable, even if it was like absolutely crazy. It was just, if we don't really want to think about that, stamp acceptable risk.
Acceptable risk statement. Yep. Move on with that.
But now with like some of the stuff, like the ransomware stuff, taking down entire hospitals.
Well, and just a little over a month ago, 300 plus dental offices all got hit with ransomware that actually came through the EMR provider.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so they all purchased services from a central MSP basically that ran this EMR system. Credentials were used at the MSP to push ransomware to all 300 plus dental offices, and then it ate their networks, right? Like not only did it cut them off from their EMR data, their health records and stuff, it proceeded to work its way around the dental offices and crush all their equipment there. We've talked to several of those dental offices after the fact, and they're, you know, 60 days later, they're still trying to recover from that because they didn't have, as with a lot of small companies, right? Small dental offices, small doctor offices are no different than any other, small business, 15, 20, 30
Mm-hmm.
employees. They don't have big fancy, backup systems and, and people to take care of that and stuff like that. Most of them had, minimal sort of, backup, so that they were left with, totally rolling equipment out or just starting over from bare metal.
Well, in the vein of dentist offices, I saw one not too long ago that didn't have any computers. Everything was paper.
That
They're
almost scares me worse.
even down to the calendar system. They would just,
Yeah.
everything was paper. And it makes sense if things are going to be too complicated for them, and regulatory risk is there, and then the outsource provider you're using gets you owned. And
Sure, and a small enough practice, you can see where that makes sense. I don't know what they would do with the portability portion. I guess you'd rely on,
here's your file folder.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're in charge of it now,
Yeah. That's interesting. And not necessarily a terrible idea, right? But you obviously can't run a hospital I guess they used to run hospitals like that, but you can't efficiently run, larger organizations like that. But I can see on a smaller level where you could easily get away with doing something like that, right?
Yeah.
3 or 4 dental chairs, that's all you got. A couple thousand patients, a couple lock cabinets, and some paperwork. Why not?
I mean, you limit your liability down to fire insurance, really.
Right. I would think your difficulty there would be when it comes to processing your insurance stuff and things like that, because I assume that a lot of that has to be just, the way you do this is through this online portal, right?
I bet you money there's still a fax machine.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean?
I still have a fax machine.
I needed to fax something to somebody yesterday, and I was like, we don't have one.
Yeah.
I guess we need to buy one.
We actually still have one. Still have a fax line, the whole bit. And we use it specifically for, look, I'm going to send you some ultra sensitive data, and I don't want it going across the network, right? Sometimes we'll send people breach data and stuff like that. And it's funny because you'll talk to somebody and you're like, yeah, I'm going to fax this to you because I just don't want it to go across your network. And they're like, fax. I think we have one of those somewhere. But it's funny. I mean, a lot of organizations still do, right?
Yeah.
It's a crazy simple fallback, but it does work. I love backup plans, so
yeah, I'm with you on that.
That's my thing. Let's see, what else did I have on my crazy list of stuff? All right, so we talked about the carbon black thing. Oh, so these kind of two things go together. So along the line of VMware, we had Michael Dell last week at a big conference talking about how VMware is going to get to Kubernetes soon. Like literally, the quote was "soon." It was like, doesn't that seem like you should maybe already be there? Giant company like yourself. And then right on the tail of that was Docker announcing that they're basically running out of money and going broke. And I was like, how does that happen? I don't know about your clients, but in my client base, man, everybody is all Kubernetes all the time, right? Like it's the new thing. They're just,
Yeah, and where we're not using it, we've been moving to use it.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
it makes sense across, deploying stuff across multiple infrastructures, architectures. It's repeatable. I mean, why not use it?
Self-scaling, all that other sort of stuff, right? I mean, so we're seeing a huge amount of that, in our clients, with obviously the standard growing pains and stuff like that associated with it. But the numbers I pulled here was Docker's raised $273 million since their inception in 2010. 273 million, which I guess is, I mean, as pervasive as that tool is, right? That doesn't seem like that big a raise.
Yeah, I mean, you divide that by 9 years.
Right. But the rumor is on the street that Microsoft offered to buy them for $4 billion. Well, I think it was the big B.
Yeah, no, I think that might still be a little B. I don't know. I mean,
it's only 4, right?
Yeah, it's a small number, as the kids would say. It's a 4.
Yeah. 4's not hard. I can add that together.
Yeah.
So it's small. In 2017, and apparently it didn't. Well, as we all know, it didn't happen, and now they're in some sort of financial difficulty. And I saw a piece where they were talking about maybe having to lay off, employees and things like this, which just seems stunning for the explosion of that technology. And maybe it's the way they're licensed, maybe how they work with other companies, things like that. I don't know what's causing that, but seems like how is that possible? When
I don't know.
Every client I have is moving that direction.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know, because as you know, like our experience has always been bootstrap versus non-bootstrap. So there's a lot of different dynamics there. But I think that there's also a lot more freedom and a lot more awareness on where money's going, where money's coming from, just as a natural offset of having to, produce it. And I always wonder, like you always see a handful of people that get a lot of VC, and it's supreme failure. Some of that, I wonder if it's just supreme failure because they're getting a lot of free success right away, and that they're not getting enough stress to push them through. So who knows, man? Maybe they maybe it might be just as simple as also maybe not a VC versus non-VC issue. It's just cash flow is complex. How many employees do they have like that? Where are those employees? Which states are they from? Are they even thinking about what the cost is per state? And maybe they got sued by maybe 2 or 3 employees for something bad in a state that has a lot more regulation. And hey, maybe that's what's getting them. Who really knows? I mean, it could be a variety of issues that just are complex, just from a business perspective.
Yeah. It seems like. See, I guess from the outside, and maybe it's just business practices, right? Like, maybe you go from startup to a $273 million funded company in a period of 9 years, 10 years. Maybe you don't have the greatest underpinnings there, right? And
but still to walk
or maybe
away
it goes
from
all
that
back to that revenue per head count. Who knows? I don't.
But to walk away from that little B, that $4 billion, like what was the target they're going for?
Yeah, that.
How many series of fund rounds of funding did they have?
Yeah, and that's kind of a weird thing right now. The whole Microsoft thing. Microsoft apparently embracing the whole Linux thing without any of the kind of baggage that's been there over the years. They own GitHub now. They've made a lot of really smart acquisitions over the last few years too. So far I was actually reading a piece from Linus Torvalds last week saying that he was basically cautiously optimistic about Microsoft's involvement, in Linux, and them recognizing it was such a large part of the Azure platform and stuff like this that they needed to, step in and quit fighting it and get on board with it. But Microsoft becoming something of like a really large, strangely enough, open source player, right? I mean,
yeah, but I mean, in the end, certain levels of lore will possibly disappear. Things expand and contract, and then history repeats itself. And maybe in 15 years we're going to have a whole nother maybe Microsoft will be the Sun Microsystems of the day, and open source is gone for a while.
Yeah.
And then open source is going to have to reemerge later. And I mean, who knows?
I don't. I think they're making some interesting moves here and there.
Yeah,
I mean, them again, going back to them offering $4 billion supposedly, rumor.
Yeah. $4 billion
for Docker. I mean, that's again a big move on, the open source sort of community, right?
Yeah.
Shows some sort of vision there, right, outside of the Windows operating system and obviously their Azure platforms, growing rapidly.
Yeah.